Hello, welcome to Squish. Hello and welcome to SquishiVision, where I forgot to put my microphone down. My name is Harris, and it's my reaction to Star Trek Prodigy, which I've just finished watching all 20 episodes of during my trial of um, Paramount Plus. I've just been looking at the actual original broadcast dates, and yeah, did not realize that Prodigy has actually been broadcasting for like more than 12 months. I don't know how often did it come out. Let me just quickly double check this. It broadcast on like it was a weekly basis, but then it took like an entire month and a half gap, and then like half a year gap. It took breaks whilst Discovery season 4 was being broadcast, whilst Picard season 2 and Strange New Worlds and Discovery being broadcast. It's very, very strange. But yeah, so let's gonna mute speakers real quick. So yeah, so this is my reaction to having just watched it. Most of it's probably gonna be the last section of episodes I've just watched. Much like my season 1 review of Strange New Worlds, where I was like, I can only remember the last couple of episodes clearly, and then the earlier ones for obvious reasons, but I'll try to give like a broad series level overview as well for as much as I can remember. But this is Star Trek's third animated series, and kind of it's a opposite to Lower Decks in that, well, instead of being 2D, it's in 3D. It's the first 3D animated Star Trek. Instead of being aimed at a more adult audience than Star Trek normally, or classic Star Trek normally is, it's being aimed at a younger audience. And strangely, it's actually more serialized than you'd think. Than certainly I expected it to be. Classic Trek was very episodic. Obviously, more modern Trek is more serialized, but this is possibly even more serialized than that. And Lower Decks is mostly episodic, but this is, I mean, you normally expect shows that are aimed at, I hate the phrase children's TV because it implies it's infantile. Whereas I find a lot of shows that are children films and children's shows have a lot of kind of mature plots and are very kind of deep and detailed. But there's a different, like, there's certain production aspects, and usually we expect from a show that is, broadcast on children's TV channels, like Nickelodeon, is that it tends to be episodic because ideally, well, you imagine the people who watch this, the children who watch the show aren't necessarily those who have. You wouldn't tell to like children who aren't sitting down watching each and every episode. They're like, tuning in every now and then, and there's a self-contained plot. That's not to say like there's never been serialized children's shows, but you just don't tend, like, you'd expect it to be more episodic side, but actually, this is like, we pretty much see their entire journey. There might be one or two episodes where it doesn't directly follow on from the previous episode, but like usually where we start the first scene of the next episode is directly from the previous scene of the previous episodes. Even when there's like no reason for it to be, it explicitly is. So that's an interesting fact. But yeah, so the show stars, the premise of the show, a prototype star fleet ship is found by a bunch of children who are basically slave labor, and they use it to escape. And they realize the kind of twist, but actually, so the ship's also being there's a person called the Diviner, and he's got like a robot lackey called Dreadlock, and they're basically trying to find a ship as well. And the reason why is that actually the ship was one that they captured in the future. It's some time travel stuff here. The ship traveled to the future, got captured, and then travels back. So about the same time it was lost. So it's not a futuristic ship, but it has gone back and forth. But they captured the ship in the future when it jumped to the future, and it's revealed that the species that the Diviner is from. And it's interesting that they actually use this as a premise. When Starfleet made first contact, it actually triggered a civil war on the planet because half of the people actually wanted to join the Federation, the other half was so adamantly against it that, well, both of them adamantly for their own side, and it provoked a civil war which ends up ruling the civilization, and it's implied causing the deaths of most of the population. I mean, to the point where everyone who was still alive went on this mission, and they're not sure who else has actually survived other than the few who we see during the series. So they put a futuristic weapon in the ship called the Construct, and essentially, if any Starfleet, specifically Starfleet vessel, next to downloads, hails, docks, whatever with the protostar, it will be infected by the Construct, which will cause it to basically attack any other Starfleet vessel, including itself. And so once so their kind of motivations as characters is firstly escape from the planet they're being kept slaves on, and then so on the protostar there's a hologram of Janeway, and she explains the Federation, and most of them are enamored by it, and the one who isn't gets, later on very much falls into the whole, gets persuaded by it. But no, I mean, sorry, I went too far ahead. It's interesting that the whole concept of why the Diviner's race is against Federation is actually it's actually a very potent commentary on colonialism. There's a lot of colonialist criticisms to put about Starfleet, and it's not the first show to have made the connection. Edison famously in Deep Space Nine raises the point that the Federation assumes very arrogantly that everyone would want to join them unless there's less than benignant reasons why you would want to, like either you're with us or against us, kind of dichotomy, which is quite problematic. I mean, it's confusing because Star Trek is both a commentary on our world as it currently is, but it's also set in a very idealistic future. And from where I'm sitting at the moment, Starfleet and the Federation are pretty down awesome. Like the whole unified humanity, post-scarcity socialism, what's there not to like? But I guess but obviously it's a fiction created in the present, so it's gonna embody a lot of the problematic natures. And even if you, from the futuristic point of view, there's a bunch of problematic stuff. So it's very colonialist. Like it expects people who come across Federation would want to join a Federation. A lot of some of its missions we've seen, e.g. DS9 and Bajor, are very much, do whatever you can to convince them to join a Federation, and they can be quite forceful, shy of invasion, but often missionary-esque. And so it's interesting that their whole premise is, and it's very kind of mature of an animated show to make that self-criticism that actually, they came across, they made this offer, and then they didn't bother to deal with the political fallout they instigated, and it caused this planet to destroy itself. But yeah, jumping back forward, Janeway hologram explains the Federation, and they all want to move to Federation, but then they learn that if they go to Federation, they'll destroy the ship. So then their whole efforts are basically trying to contact the Federation without getting the ship in the way, kind of deal. So yeah, that's kind of the broad series thing. I guess we talk about the characters. They're all meant to be well. So so you've got Dal, who appoints himself captain, and he's a 17-year-old. It's later revealed human augment, which comes up later on in the series as well. So yeah, when they finally do reach Federation Starfleet, Janeway kind of reveals that as an augment, he's, augmentation is outlawed in the Federation, and so they're not usually willing to accept augments as Starfleet officers because it goes against the laws. And it's interesting that they kind of have that plot point, because that plot point also exists as a plot point in Strange New Worlds, as I was talking about the other day, with Shin Riley being a Illyrian and genetically modified. She ends up in the plot. The cliffhanger is her getting arrested for being an augment. This is obviously set 120, 30 years in the future, and we know that they've softened on the idea such that they would let Lieutenant Bashir be in Star Trek Starfleet, even though he's an augment, and they justified it as, I mean, he's the first one who's openly an augmented human in the Federation, but they allowed it because he didn't consent to do it, and yeah, basically that he didn't consent to do it. Sorry, I'm just talking a bit fast here. Yeah, he didn't consent to do it, and I guess it's a similar thing with Dal, and they do eventually let him in, and I guess that's a precedent. Then you have Gwyn, who's Diviner's daughter, and she was Divine created her. I don't know if that's how they naturally reproduce, but I guess he cloned her or whatever, or created her from his own DNA artificially. In case he died before he completed his mission, and she would take over. So he's basically grooming her to be that bad guy. And I'm glad. I was kind of worried that she would spend the entirety of the show, or like it would be a very kind of arbitrary situation. Basically, we know she's the protagonist, so at some point she was gonna like turn against her father's wishes. And I was worried that they do this thing I've seen other kind of shows targeted that younger audience, where I'm not doing what you want me to do, father, because it's the wrong thing to do, and it's like just plain as simple as that. And like, not saying they're wrong to like go against wishes of the fathers when their parents when it's obviously wrong, but sometimes the heel turn is just so like it's forced, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. But they established pretty on that she's somewhat uncomfortable with the operations of her father, but she doesn't know anything else, so she goes along with it, and she spends the first couple episodes actively working against the crew. She's kept in the brig, but she escapes, and she tries to she basically wants to please her father more than anything else. But her father kind of makes the mistake of betraying her, and for reasons which later on you can understand why he would, but that kind of pushes her wholeheartedly against him, which makes sense. And it's kind of like a two-way betrayal thing where she's already kind of turning against him, but he puts the final nail in the coffin. And I'm glad they kind of do that. The way they do it, I'm glad they did it that way. I'm glad they didn't do it in a very kind of just a basic flat way. We had some kind of nuance and detail and took some time around it, and then she became part of the crew. She effectively acts as their communication officer. She's a linguist. Her father made her learn like every single language until she like knows everyone's language. But she's also like one of the other like most mature and competent. I mean, she's one of the oldest one there, I think. Then we have Zero, who is a Medusa, who I think Medusans are, if I remember correctly, a species that we are first introduced to in the original series. And I'm just looking at the memory alpha page, and yeah, it's is there in truth no beauty, which I think I've seen bits of. So yeah, so Zero's a Medusian, whose whole the Medusans' whole things about their appearance drives most other intelligent life mad if they see them, or if they see them unfiltered. So Zero, they live in well, the character there, and that's the only way you can see them without going mad. And if you see them unfiltered, you will go mad. And it's interesting because like sometimes they come across as like the most intelligent, knowledgeable, but also it's clear that they're relatively a child for their species, and there's some things that they do which are like they're interesting character in that kind of dichotomy because they seem very scientific and knowledgeable and mature, and also they're telepathic, so obviously they have that insight, but they don't really have that filter. And I like that about them. And they effectively act as the Medclops and the flight control. So yeah, I'll backtrack a bit. Dal's whole character arc is, I guess, is several things. One is becoming, well, he doesn't know what species he is. He doesn't know he's a human augment. So his whole thing is firstly trying to find out what his origins are. He wants to survive more than anything else to start off with. So he's initially suspicious of Starfleet because he thinks it's just swapping one master for another master. He thinks Starfleet, like every other kind of organization, would just kind of exploit them, which again is a very mature thing for the show to do because proper Star Trek shies away from painting the Federation as anything short of a utopian that you would absolutely want to go for. So the whole suspicion of any kind of authority, any kind of institution, is kind of a mature thing put in the show. And I mean, obviously we know, I believe that Federation is worth it, but it's so much shopping to do, and it's also him learning to become a leader, not kind of just for his old ego. I mean, for like a 17-year-old, it's pretty normal. Like, I mean, a lot of 17-year-olds get their first kind of position of authority, and like from my own experience, I think the first time you get any position of authority, very rarely are you able to deal with it maturely. And I'll talk from my own experiences here. I was in the cadets in Britain, in the air cadets. When I had no rank, I would see people get rank and, not necessarily be the most mature about it. They would, to some degree, they would exploit. They would not exploit, but they would abuse their power. They would, or they would overcompensate. They would try to like be strong with their authority. They would be too bossful. They would be, they're given the power, and they want to make sure that you respect that power. And it's not like entirely malicious. It's kind of like, because when you're in authority, you do need to like enforce your authority. It's just the nature of human nature. If you don't come across as a strong leader, people lose confidence in you, and they don't want to follow you. It's pretty normal. And we've all had people who are, in charge of projects that we don't trust their confidence. We don't have confidence in them, and even I'm guilty of it now. If I have confidence in someone's leadership ability, I'll have to keep forcing myself to listen to what they're saying, and depending on the context of the situation. And so anytime you're in leadership, you need to inspire confidence to people you follow. But obviously, if you're like first time you be in leadership, it's a skill set where you're not that mature, you haven't developed maturely enough. So as a child in a leadership position, you're not measured with your attempt to strike confidence in your own authority, and so you overcompensate. And I saw people do it when I was a cadet. When I got rank, I basically followed their examples. There's that kind of cycle as well. I didn't know better, so I was a bit of an asshat with trying to establish my authority. Obviously, I had and still have a lot of insecurity, and that's kind of a compensating way. But because I went through that asshat stage young enough, when I got position of responsibility when I was older, I was able to be more mature about it. And I like to think I got over a lot of the asshattery. I still, as a leader, you still constantly learn every day and all day. But I don't do a lot of that kind of asshat thing. I'm prepared to like listen to people. I'm prepared to like give other people space. I have confidence in the fact that I'm a good leader, that I don't need to prove it to anyone anymore. So it's very natural for Dal to go through that journey, and it's great to see it on screen. And it's great. I mean, usually child characters can be cringy purely because they're written by adults who don't know how children act. It helped a lot of them are alien species, but I think a few things I found a bit cringy, but for the most part, I was enjoying them. And I enjoy a series, just to be clear. I think it's a great Star Trek series. Gwen's whole thing is obviously conflict of interest between saving her own people once she learns that, and supporting the crew. But like there's no like kind of, it's not a conflict or a tension thing. She pretty clearly sides with her crew, her friends, over the mission. But it's kind of her learning to deal with, like, be part of a team. But to be fair, she has the least to grow, but not in an annoying way, because she's a pretty strong, confident character to start off with. And she gets, I think she's the most, because she's the source of most of the conflict early on in the show. She gets that kind of reprieve of being the least conflict later on, if that makes sense. Zero also doesn't have much to do, much problems, to be honest. They're one of the most stable characters too. Then we have Rock Tank, voiced by Really Alazraki, who is the youngest of the crew, even though that she's the biggest. She's actually 8 years old. And I guess, and she acts like kind of a younger child, but she's still fairly competent. And she's got a nice little thing where everyone kind of assumes because she's like the brawny one, she'd want to be the security officer because she's physically the strongest, but she doesn't like that. She's typecast into that role. I mean, there's an episode which basically explores everyone's backstory, which to a part we didn't really need most people. Like Zero's backstory is that they got captured when they were left behind accidentally by the rest of the magicians and then used as a weapon, which is pretty much what we already knew anyway, apart from how they were captured. But it's fine. It was a fun episode anyway. It wasn't a problematic episode. It was just kind of amusing that they had to come up with those reasons. But yeah, so Rock's the youngest, and she doesn't. Oh yeah, we see her backstory. And she's basically forced to be like a gladiator, but like a performative one, so that she's not actually fighting someone, but she's like having to like pretend the role. She has to basically be the baddie, but because she's basically being representing her race. It's like a thing where she's playing into her own stereotype as a monster, and people then see her actually as a monster, not as an actor. And it's because of that she doesn't like being violent in real life, and she actually wants to be a scientist, and I really like that, and it's actually a great message to put in a children's show. It's one, I mean, it's not a novel one, but teaching kids you can reject your own stereotype is a fantastic message. Deep Valley Baker of Star Wars, the Clone Wars fame, voices Murph, who doesn't actually communicate in any coherent language, but basically in kind of trills and purrs. Is an interesting character. It's not clear how old they are. It's not clear how sapient they are. It's not clear if they're an intelligent life form. I mean, they seem to have some degree of intelligence, but they spend like the first half of the series basically just being a sea slug with very little kind of understanding what's going on, but just seems happy to be there. They have a kind of evolution where they cocoon themselves and then they turn into the same thing but less slug-like, and instead kind of are bipedal. And they end up kind of becoming a security officer, purely because it turns out that they're indestructible and also can like be of people on demand. So by process of elimination, they are now the security officer. And then we have Jan Kapog. I left them to last, even though they're the third highest credited character, purely because everyone else, I mean, okay, no calling D. Bradley Baker as Murph, but that's an exception because D. Bradley Baker is a veteran voice actor, basically doing noises very kind of Frank Wello-esque. With the exception of that character, everyone else is, and also Riley Alazraki, who I don't know how old she is, but I'm assuming that's probably because she's relatively young and hasn't done anything else. I feel like probably that she's probably a child voice actor. Everyone else is basically 26 to 28, playing 16 to 17-year-olds, which isn't unusual. It's pretty common, especially in voice acting. But then you have Jason Mantzoukas of Brooklyn Nine-Nine fame, who is about, what is he like? He's 40, 50? yeah, he's 51 years old. Um, Voicing one of the youngest characters, a 16-year-old, which I just think is hilarious. But yeah, just Jankum Pog is kind of right, and he basically becomes an engineer. He's got a prosthetic hand that he's able to kind of replace with tools. And he frequently has a catchphrase where he refers to himself in third person. Um, uh, yeah. And then we have the hologram Captain Janeway, who kind of acts a bit like Catherine, the actual Catherine Janeway, but is a bit less competent because she's a hologram. So a lot of the things that the real Janeway would be too savvy to like be fooled by, she's kind of fooled by. When they first come on the ship, they all trick her into thinking they're cadet. Well, no, she assumes they're cadets, which I don't know why she assumed that when they no reason. Um, but they all go with the rules anyway, which again I'm not entirely sure. I mean, yeah, a lot of time they go with like they assume the worst and like lie to get out of it rather than tell the truth when it would have served them better. But that's again a very child thing to do, so I can't really blame them because they're actually all children. Um, but she kind of grows when she learns that they're not Starfleet. She doesn't hold it against them at all. She's basically an advisor. Um, she's not able to control the ship from the higher function, so she needs the crew, so she can't just take over for them, and this lets them grow, and she learns and she kind of teaches them and stuff, and she's obviously as a hologram susceptible to kind of issues that arise. Um, but it's a good use of like a legacy character. Um, yeah, and then we have the two kind of villains who are in this splash screen behind me. We have Jimmy Simpson as Dreadnought, who is basically a Terminator-esque, but a mix between a Terminator. If Terminator was a tank. It's a mixture between Terminator and the Corruptor from Horizon Zero Dawn. Um, Basically acts as the enforcer, and the designer is voiced by John Noble of Lord of the Rings fame, which is always nice to see. And he has a nice kind of arc going from basically Shakespearean level of villainy to having a bit of conflict and nuance, and then he has like a short. He basically has a redemption death at the end. Um, and then we got some bunch of guest characters, some recurring. Robert Beltran, surprisingly to an extent, considering Beltran's apathy towards Star Trek when he was actually on Star Trek Voyager, returns as Captain Chakotay, but only like flashbacks. We have Billy Campbell returning as Okana. I think he returned in Lower Decks, but actually that might have been a voiceless cameo. Ronnie Cox as Jellicoe makes a return, a brief return, and then Kate Mulgrew, as well as voicing the hologram Janeway, also appears as the actual Janeway as a vice admiral. So the plot of the show, it's like it's pretty serialized, but it's one continuous narrative. There's like three parts to it. The first part is them escaping. So a two-part is that the two-part ends with them basically. Two-part is basically the story of how they come together, how they escape the planet, introducing to each other. They escape. Uh, they kidnap Gwyn as a kind of way to escape. Uh, and then they go and explore planet in oh no there's another episode which I kind of always forget exists because it's pretty forgettable, all things considered, called Starstruck. I think these episodes are only like 20 minutes long, so they're very short episodes, all things considered. So often you like especially in the first few, you feel like you're reaching the middle of like an episode and then it's like it just ends. But to be fair, it's because it's serialized, it kind of doesn't really matter. But the second episode of this series, I think, is the weakest purely because it's just like it's a bit forgettable and a bit pointless. Um, oh, okay. I guess So that's actually the episode which Jamie first appears in, because she doesn't appear in the first one, or she doesn't appear until the end. But that's the one where they basically learn about Starfleet, and then they end up being, oh yeah, Dal basically just, this is Dal being a bad captain, and he basically says he wants to fly towards a random part of space. He sees on the map, which looks interesting, which is to be a star, and they have to kind of work together to escape. And I guess it's their first kind of opportunity to ever work together, and they kind of learn about that. But it's a kind of a episode which just is there to kind of give them this buffer space of establishing a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of like the expedition episode. Then the next one is basically a series of, it's like, I think it's a 3-parter that effectively becomes, but they land on a planet. It's basically an M-class planet that Dal reluctantly agrees to land on. They're very, I give this to the rest of the crew, they're very loyal to corrections, 2-part story, but they're very loyal to Dal's captaincy that he self-appointed himself on. Because when he's like, no, we won't do this, they all kind of listen to him initially or argue with him, but they've got no reason to. I guess he is the oldest, and that's what kids are inclined to do. But they land on a planet because Jamie's like, you're part of Starfleet's standing order to explore strange new worlds, and if Dal refuses, she's going to report them to Starfleet. So lands on this planet, but true to form, Zero just goes off on his own thing. Everyone else goes and does their own thing. They then realize that, it then becomes clear by the third act of that episode that the planet's actually one big kind of vegetation organism which uses creates illusions to draw you in, and then captures you and eats you. Once you realize trying to escape, meanwhile Gwyn is escaped on the ship from the brig and tells the diviner where they are. Gwyn tries to escape and leave him behind with the ship, but causes the ship to crash. And yeah, I guess it's a kind of episode where they properly bond, because they're stranded on the planet and they have to save each other's lives and do a bunch of things. And it's when Gwen gets betrayed by her father and turns. Again, I'm at this point, I'm very unsure about the series of what it's kind of going. I haven't quite connected to the characters yet, but by the end of it, I'm kind of growing on them, and I'm glad that kind of does a whole a lot of the Gwyn's full commitment to the crew pretty early on. Brief break from the going through the episodes to talk about the opening title sequence real quick. The theme tune's stuck in my brain, but that might be kind of been hearing it a whole bunch of times. It's pretty decent opening titles. Basically, the ship flies through space, and they fly through different objects in space, which are meant to represent all the characters. Some of them are more abstract. Well, yeah, some of them are a bit abstract. Some of them are pretty clearly the characters. For example, the first. Well, I can't. Okay, this does bother me. I can't for the life of me tell which part of that opening titles is meant to represent Dal. If someone knows, please tell me. I literally can't work it out. I keep staring to try to work it out. But the first one I can identify is a bunch of rocky stuff, and eventually the ship flies past where it's clearly Rock's face. So I'm saying it's some things are abstract, some things are pretty obvious. Then I think we fly past a bunch of gelatinous orbs in space, and I think this is meant to represent Mirth, but this is more abstract. And then we fly past basically a giant orb with a gaseous gas inside it, gaseous gas, as opposed to non-gaseous gases, which is basically just this part of sorry, I'm moving my mouse, but the mouse is up here on my stream, which is basically this part of Zero's body. Then we fly through a bunch of metal coming together, and eventually revealed to be not Jason, that's not his name, that's the name of the actor. Why am I forgetting his character's name? Jankum's robot arm. and then we fly what appears to be the weapon of Gwen. She's got his weapon, she can control her brain, and we fly past that, merging, and then we fly past what looks like a very kind of sculpturesque image of her head, and then we basically fly past like a glowing red light, which then another light appears, and it's actually the Dreadlock's face. And that's like less abstract, and then we fly through a fragmented version of a hologram Janeway. I cannot work out where Dal is in all this. I don't think the Divine is in this, which to be fair, he's like the main villain, so I guess he wouldn't be able to Dreadlock is, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I can't work it out, but it's a good series. I like how the music ends basically by repeating itself a whole bunch of times, like it refuses to end, but that's kind of it's a bit amusing. Next episode is called Kobayashi for obvious reasons, because Dal spends the episode basically trying to do the Kobayashi Maru, the Kobayashi Maru test. It's a nice like series of homages because he gets to choose his own holographic crew, and we basically get a bunch of classic Trek characters appearing, primarily through archive footage, and most of them are deceased actors, so it's kind of like a homage to them, and these are all like archive recordings from like episodes that are past. And to be fair, they don't do much to kind of disguise the fact that it is this. When Spock speaks, it sounds like it's coming through like a radio or an old-style TV speaker. But I guess it works in the context of this being a hologram. But like it's very kind of like staticky, or slightly staticky. But we have we see Spock's there, we see Scotty, we see Odo, Uhura, we have Beverly Crusher, who I don't actually know if her appearance is archival or if she voiced new lines, because she was the only one who reappeared who's actually still alive. And the bridge is based off of the one from Enterprise D. So that was nice, and by the end of it, purely accident, purely because of the archival text that Spock happened to say at a particular time, he learns how to be a better captain. Even though he didn't realize that the whole point of the test is to not fail. That being said, actually, this is one of the frustrating things. He did actually succeed in the Kobayashi Maru. He only failed because he accidentally presses the button on the bird of prey that he's taken over and fires a torpedo at his own ship, and destroys it. That's the only reason why he fails that simulation. But his entire plan up to that point actually succeeds. So he actually does beat Kobayashi Maru. The fact that he's already won, he like there's not like part of a simulation. Like it's just his own accidental stuff. If he did it again and didn't do that, he'd be fine. So I don't know why he was so upset. He basically won. Whatever. Whilst he's doing that, what's everyone else doing? What is everyone else doing? Oh yeah. Gwen's basically having her crisis point. Uh, do. What are they doing? Oh, but there's a bunch of other references to other Star Trek stuff as well. Through the hologram, we see Andoria, we see a Khalifi fight, we see Seti Alpha 5. Um, oh yeah, it's basically Gwen finding her kind of role, like her confidence, um, and she does because she manages to crack some code to kind of discover uh extra memories of what happened to the ship and things like that. Um, and what happened to the previous crew. But it's a good episode, a decent fan service. The next one, I think it's probably one of the most episodic ones. Essentially, we meet Dal's adoptive mother, who's a Ferengi, who's later revealed sold him into slavery, and she basically tries to use their ship to do a scam and nick a bunch of crystals from a planet. Dal goes along with it because I think out of some kind of obligation to a maternal figure, and also because he thinks that she will give him give them a cloaking device to hide from the diviner. But obviously then she betrays them, and it reveals that then she basically nicks the crystals that they're meant to trade for, and the crew have to basically like fix their own mistake, and Joey tells them off, and they learn a lesson, and it's all right. It's fine. It's pretty like basic episode. Oh, I like the next one. The next episodes are really fun. Like Alexa, mute. The next one's a really like fun episode. Oh, why is my bitrate dropped? Yeah, the next one's a really fun episode. To do like a bunch of time kind of shenanigans. Attack on Storm basically messes around with something or another, and so basically the crew are struggling to work together. And what this time messy thing does is it causes them all to move at different rates of time. So Rock, basically her time gets slowed down so much that she's like living for like years, and it's not even revealed how much time it was, but it's a long period of time. Whilst someone else, basically it's like same hour goes about in like a click, and everyone else is like in different levels between. And so whatever, and because they're all working at the same time, it influences the other time frames, but they can't explicitly communicate. So they have to kind of use intuition and what they know of each other to work together. And Janeway can exist in all periods of time if she speeds herself up or slows herself down, so she's able to cross between the different streams. But so she's able to like pass on what happened in like the other moment. But ultimately, because of different various reasons, because somehow by knowing the exact location of where the protostar is, the diviner is able to basically send a signal that hijacks their massive vehicle replicator to create what is technically, I guess, a duplicate of Dreadlock, although it's not really clear how it works, because like he seems to like, I guess it's a duplicate of Dreadlock with Dreadlock's memories at that point, but it's kind of suggested. It's really weird, and it seems like why he shouldn't be able to, just because you know where something is doesn't mean you can like take over their systems. That's not how Star Trek works. But whatever. It's a bit one of these weird things. Like this is not how. It's not how things work. The security can have like we have firewalls in real life that right now would prevent that from happening. You'd have to, you'd have to lower some kind of defense for that to work. I guess they do kind of have like some degree of command codes, but whatever. I feel like that shouldn't really work. But yeah, Dreadlock briefly gets onto the ship, and Gwen has to like fight him off, and ultimately does. And then it's basically ends up being it's all up to Rock to save everyone, and she's very kind of initially she doesn't want to because she's intimidated by like the responsibility. This is that point where she's like, I don't want to be a security officer, and Jeremy's like, and when they get stuck in a time edgy, Jeremy's like, you got to do all this to save the crew, and she's like, no, it's too much. Please just go away. But eventually she kind of does because she teaches herself like loads of science as an 8-year-old, and is able to kind of fix it. And it's not clear how long she's like on her own for, but it's like a long time. But she basically manages in this episode to discover she loves science a lot and is able to kind of save everyone. And it's a really great episode. It uses like time mechanic elements in a very kind of novel way, and I really enjoyed it. And it's when the crew start meshing together and become much more tightly knit and respectful of each other. Then we have the first two-parter, and I guess what's effectively the mid-series kind of peak. So the diviner is basically like, if you don't bring the ship back, I'm gonna start killing other slaves, which is interesting because like I did think when they escaped the first episode, cool, 5 of you escaping on this massive ship which could technically save everyone. And to be fair, they only just managed to escape, so I guess they are kind of justified in not taking anyone else with them. But if I was one of those other slaves, I'd be like, well, screw them. But they kind of make up for it in this episode. They it's really good as well. They because all of these kids are like, their flaws are basically their children, and so they make childish errors, but they are actually all very, very clever, and it's this nice balance. So they give an ultimatum. Dal's like, I don't want to go back to the planet, and he gets called out as selfish, potentially, by Gwyn. He's like, well, not entirely. Everyone, I want to keep everyone in my menu crew safe, and it's my as captain, it's camera, so I'm supposed to keep everyone safe. And she's like, well, that's fair enough, but we can do this all together if we work together. And they come up with a plan. It's a really clever thing where you think the plan's gone wrong, but the plan going wrong was a plan all along, and they planned for that. And they're like, I know I get failed to like enjoy those kind of moments. So they take the ship back. They're acting as if they're trying to like trade the ship for all the slaves and for the enemy ship. But then obviously we get double crossed. But even if we get double crossed, Gwyn, the divine's like, okay, but also you have to let me take Gwyn back with me. And Gwyn's like, this is fine, like it's worth it, kind of thing. Like, it looks like she's like kind of sacrificing herself, or she's making a choice to leave the crew. But actually, that was always the plan. The plan was always for her to go back with the ship. It's like kind of like a double bluff. They steal the protostar and are able to basically put the entire protostar inside Murph, because Murph is indestructible. This apparently includes being able to like contain an entire protostar. So when they leave with the ship, they can't jump to Federation space because the protostar doesn't exist anymore. Meanwhile, the crew are basically able to like take over the enemy ship, fix it, get it ready to like they inspire all the slaves to join their cause and fight and get ready to defend themselves when the Valley returns to get the star back. They try to take over Janeway, but they already like prepared for that, and like Jim was only pretending to be taken over by, but in fact she was actually part of the plan as well. And they ultimately are able to kind of defeat the Diviner and I guess destroy Deadrock, because we don't see him ever again. We see another one, like a different Deadrock. Deadrock? That's not his name. Deadlock. See another Deadlock later on. But yeah, they defeat with. Oh yeah, but there's also a thing where the Diviner finally realizes what the whole kind of backstory is about, how the Federation made first contact and that destroyed the family. And this is the kind of like the only one hiccup in the whole thing, in the whole plan, because it forces that's Gwyn doesn't complete her part of the plan because she's distracted by this truth, but the others are able to kind of compensate around it. And ultimately, to save everyone, Zero reveals her pure form to Diviner. Diviner goes mad. Gwen also loses her memory because she sees the reflection of Zero, so she doesn't remember the reveal, which is a bit frustrating. But then they only actually keep that memory loss active for like a single episode, and then she gets all her memories back, which I'm like, okay, like it's only existent for like the next episode, so they can get in trouble again about it and understand the whole like threat of it. But then it kind of, she gets her memories back and it's fine. So I'm not like, I was gonna begrudge him it if it was like, what was the point of the whole bit if she doesn't remember, but then she does remember, so that's fine. Also, the Diviner gets over his madness, which is meant to be implied that the madness that you get if you look at the Medusa is like irreversible, but I guess it was reversible for him. So next up was a bit frustrating after the two-parter. They finally managed to like reach a Federation space, and they're like, oh, finally we've made it. We can get what we want. We can ask for asylum. And it's all going well. We meet an officer who has been alone far too long, so he's not completely like sane in the head. But that the construct essentially takes over and starts to destroy the station, and the officer assumes that it was a deliberate sabotage, and so basically abandons all these children to die and doesn't give them a chance to explain themselves and doesn't believe them when they don't know what's going on. He's basically not a very good lieutenant. And yeah, he basically abandons them and they have to escape, and yeah, that happens. So yeah, and that they realized after that what has happened. I think is that what happens? Oh, that's kind of the next one. But yeah, so that kind of leads to them being like, oh, we can't go back to Starfleet until we get rid of the thing, rid of the weapon. No, one of the annoying things about this series is the kids seem convinced that they'll get in trouble, or they potentially might get in trouble because they've stolen the protostar. Now, again, because they're kids, it's actually understandable that they might make these conclusions which aren't entirely sensible or reasonable. But other people, but you haven't stolen the ship. I mean, for anything, it's salvage rights. You found it. You didn't even know what Starfleet was until you took over the ship. You used it to escape a planet, and your entire motivation the entire time was to return it back to the Federation. That's not theft. You're not gonna... Why would they tell you off for returning a ship? They said thank you. I'll get back to this in a second towards the end of the episode because a very frustrating thing happens at the end of the series, but they come across a Borg ship, which fortunately for them is dormant. Otherwise, they'd not been able to survive. Although the ship does come alive and they still survive, either that's kind of Borg threat levels being softened for a cartoon, or again, they're really competent people. But they try to use the Borg ship to destroy the weapon using Borg technology, but they don't succeed. There's a moment where Zero basically gets assimilated, or their hive mind gets attracted to the Borg hive mind, and so they start becoming a bit Borgish. Even though the reversal of that's pretty like no big deal, super easy, barely inconvenience. Dal reminds Zero of the power of friendship, and Zero pulls off a thing off their casing and it's back to normal, and it's like, okay, I guess this is fine. It was a bit as far as Borg episodes go, a bit kind of undermines the threat of the Borg. Oh no, sorry, it was Gwyn who reminds Zero of the power of friendship. Um, yeah. Also during this time, the real Jimmy appears. They come across the destroyed station. They follow the kind of trail of the protostar. They rescue the diviner from who got left behind on the slave planet. They don't know anything about them, so they kind of, and then when the diviner kind of wakes up, they have most of their memories. They're very kind of confused, and they make a lot of assumptions about someone having taken over the protostar and used that to attack the diviner, which this is that of Janeway. So Janeway makes a lot of assumptions which are very unlike the normal Janeway. And to be fair, she admits to it later on that she made a lot of assumptions she shouldn't have made. So I guess, you know, if she's aware of her own flaws and whatever. Next episode's kind of fun. They come across a planet, which at some point the original Enterprise came across, but lost a crewman at, and I assumed left for dead because they assumed he was dead. I'm not sure where this is geographically, but it does seem to me like it'd be further out than the original Enterprise ever would have gone. It's definitely Kirk's Enterprise because the person who landed explicitly talks about during the time of being part of staff of Kirk's crew, I think. But the person, you know, lands on the planet, got rescued by the natives, ends up telling about what Starfleet is, and then his story basically becomes like part of their lore and a legend, and they all try to like embody Starfleet's through with Chain Whispers, Starfleet's kind of ideal, so or Starflight as they call it. They call like each other and their children. They name them after like Starfleet people, so they've got like Starfleet records on file they can listen to, so they know all the Starfleet logs and stories, and they take that, and then they replicate. It's basically a space, a station, a planet or a community full of cosplayers. Um, it's a nice episode. It's not. It has a bit cheesy, but like it could have been cheesier. But eventually, it's revealed that the crashed original shuttle that the um officer was in is causing like poisoning, and they managed to fix that, and it's, make the place safe for the people to live in. They use them to help them save the planet, and through that they learn that they realize that actually we don't need a ship to be competent. They can be competent without a ship. And then the next episode is them basically burying the ship, and trying to find a different way to Starfleet so the ship weapon can't be used. And this is where the frustration starts to happen. So pure coincidence, they arrive on the planet at the same time that Admiral Jim arrives on the planet, but also the same time that the lieutenant from the station lands on the planet. And they all kind of meet at the same spot at the same time. Also, O'Connor is there, and he joins the crew for like an episode or two for, I guess, banter. And the lieutenant's basically like, oh yeah, a bunch of savages took over my station, like sabotaged it. And rather than explain themselves, use this unique opportunity. Like, this is what's frustrating. This is the kind of the whole trope about how poor communication kills. I get their children. I guess this is where I can slightly forgive them. I get their children, and I get that it's understandable that they would assume they'd get more trouble than a reasonable person would assume, or that they'd be more scared of getting in trouble than fixing the issue. But also they're very intelligent, and I think they should realize that was the worst case scenario. But yeah, essentially, once Dal realizes that the lieutenant has given his side of the story before he worries that Starfleet will not listen to them, I guess, and flees. And then obviously Jimmy's like, well, they're fleeing. Or Starfleet's like, well, they're fleeing, so they must be the criminals. And then yeah, they are now attempting to escape from Starfleet, and the whole thing is like, oh well, we have to escape from Starfleet because they can't get the ship, otherwise they'll destroy Starfleet. But I'm like, just explain yourself. Like, what's your long-term plan? Like, ultimately, oh, you're gonna have to like tell stuff. I mean, either it was a case of them abandoning everything and deciding never quite Starfleet and never rescuing the ship, except they do rescue the ship, and then Starfleet's able to like follow the ship from there on out. So surely they're like, Gwyn also like refuses to talk to them because she realizes that they have a father, but that should be the perfect opportunity to be like, no, actually, your father's evil. I mean, actually, in fairness, it's a good thing that she doesn't, because it reveals that the Starfleet officer who she speaks to is actually secretly part of the Diviner species, and there's another one of the people who escaped. But she doesn't know that. Like, it's just frustrating that no one talks, because this was the best case scenario for them to have done so. And I get their children, and they jump into like the fearful conclusions first, but logically it was the best case scenario for all of them. And also one of them is telepathic. They could have come to that conclusion too. So eventually they escape the planet, but they're being pretty much followed. They escape into the neutral zone and avoid being spotted by Romulans, but the Dauntless isn't so lucky, and so he's trapped on the other side of the neutral zone, on the Federation side. Meanwhile, they stop at a planet to make repairs, and at that planet they meet a Nemesis who reveals that Dal's an augment, and basically Dal's feeling very insecure around O'Connor, so he accepts treatment that activates all of his automated abilities, but it kind of goes out of control and he has to get reversed, and that's kind of his whole arc. But in the meantime, they have to pay off to Tal Shiar, try to capture the ship, and this is where an evolved Murph becomes a security officer and beats them all up. It's really fun. Yeah, pretty much what happens in the episode. Janeway's like trying to be like, I need to go to neutral zone to recover the ship, and Ed Jellicoe, who reappears, is like, no, you can't go to the neutral zone. But if it looks like the Romulans are going to capture the ship, destroy the ship, and they almost do so, but they don't when they realize that the Prodigy crew were able to kind of escape. The next episode's called Preludes, and that's basically whilst fixing the ship, all of the main characters give their back. All the main characters who we don't know the backstory already give their backstory. So, well, actually, three of them do because Mo can't speak. We already know Gwen's backstory, and we kind of now know Dal's backstory. So, I've mentioned how Zero is basically a group of Medusans who got left behind. Rock, basically a stage fighter. And then we learn about Pog, who essentially oh yeah, that's why I couldn't pronounce his name because he's called Pog in the series, not by his first name. But Pog was mistakenly woken up from cryo sleep because he was actually so. Pog was actually is not the youngest, actually the oldest because he was actually alive 100 years prior. But he was in cryo sleep because the Federation hadn't been founded yet. So he was cryo sleep for like a long as the ship traveled in the Delta Quadrant. And he got woke up because there was an error with the ship, and for some reason, part of the error was he would be woken up. He got woken up rather than the senior engineer. And he manages to fix everything. Like issues keep breaking, and he fixes them. But ultimately, because of how long he was fixing issues, he's used too much oxygen, and so if he stays on a ship, everyone will asphyxiate. So he basically sacrifices himself by leaving the ship so everyone else can survive, and no one will ever know he made that sacrifice, which is a bit sad actually. So yeah, it was quite dark. Um, At this point, thankfully, Admiral Jimmy makes realization that these aren't criminals, they're just kids being kids and being over their heads. And it's bizarre that she didn't make that kind of realization when she saw they were children the first time. I mean, she kind of does. She's like, none of you when she first sees them, she's like, none of you told me that these people you saw were kids, not criminals. But then so now when she's like, huh, actually, they're children. And so you should probably approach them as children who are scared. I mean, she's doing this all the time in the Delta Quadrant during Star Trek Voyager when she came across children. So she's not like new to like dealing with kids. She gets very suspicious about the diviner, and she walks in on them on the diviner, but also the ensign who's pretending to be an ensign, and they basically knock her out. So she's not an issue anymore. The next episode actually kind of pretty much self-contained. It's a bit of a filler episode, but also serves a purpose. The crew are in the crew are basically trying to like use the holodeck to simulate an escape plan. That's just been pretty clever where they use the phasers to send like a Morse code signal out to start to the Dauntless to like tell them why they can't talk to them. But in the simulation, the Dauntless doesn't realize that it's Morse code. It assumes they're being shot at and shoots back. I don't think in real life Dauntless would make that mistake. I think if you shot phasers deliberately away from the ship in a pattern, I would realize you were doing Morse code, and so would Starfleet, who are aware of what Morse code is. They don't use it, but everyone who's ever it has been used in Star Trek before, and it's used, people are like, wait, this is Morse code. This is like a really old archaic signal. But yeah, their simulations got a worst case scenario, and they assume that they'll never be able to return Starfleet, and on all agreeing that they should probably all just hide from Starfleet for Starfleet's better safety. This activates part of the construct in Hologram Janeway, who then traps them and takes over the ship. And while they're trapped, they basically having hologram shenanigans where in a holographic simulation of all of their personal favorite holograms all get muddled together. It's a bit of like kind of a fun thing, you know. Zero does like a mystery program. Hog does like a fighting simulator. Murph lip syncs in a kind of noir setting. Dal pretends to be a pirate. I think that oh yeah, and then Gwyn doesn't have a hologram, but her father, Paul father, appears in a hologram from his hologram of their planet, which is saved in the memory banks. And she's able to kind of get to like talk to like a more sympathetic version of her father. Eventually, Zero realizes that the hologram program isn't designed to end. It's just designed to keep him in the loop. And when they realize that, it ends, and then they realize that the hologram has been kind of compromised, and that it's taken over a ship and basically flown them out of the neutral zone and into the Dauntless, and then it flies them into like Federation space. So as they're flying into Federation space, they attempt to kind of contact Janeway, Admiral Janeway, using telepathy, and because both Zero and Dal have telepathic genes, even though Dal's telepathic genes are dormant, they try to connect with Janeway, but it doesn't go completely correct, and for pseudo-scientific reasons, Dal basically has a Freaky Friday situation with Janeway. It's interesting that both this and Strange New Worlds also do the Freaky Friday situation as well as the whole augment thing. Finally, Janeway understands what's going on like completely, and they work trying to put bodies back. Meanwhile, Dal pretends to be Janeway, but obviously has no idea how. I mean, he's a kid. It's like if you're trying to roleplay someone else and you aren't that good at it, like how you're gonna come across really weird. So, and it's very annoying. Usually in Star Trek, when someone's acting weirdly, no one assumes like straight away that it's because they've been taken over, even though it happens so often that it should be the standing first question of officers acting abnormal, check for like possession or alien interference, rather than just assuming that they're being acting weird for no reason. Whilst in this episode, they come to that conclusion actually more sooner than they would have otherwise done, and because of that, they basically relieve Jimmy of duty and put her in restraints in sick bay. But for some reason, well, sorry, I am farting. But Diviner releases her from confinement as kind of payback for her kindness to him when she rescued him, which makes sense. But also, he must have realized by doing so, because he knows that he thinks that's still Janeway. He knows Janeway knows who they all are, so he must know by doing that he's basically defeating himself. But I think part of him wanted that to happen, because in the next episode he kind of has his heel turn anyway. I need to wrap up really quickly because I've got an upset stomach and I'm about to go crap myself. Just information there. So we're gonna wrap this up really quickly, which is a bit annoying. So then we have the finale, and there's a frustrating part in this. Oh yeah, there's another actually I need to end this now because I need to go to the loo desperately. We will pick this up. I'll do another stream quickly afterwards. We'll pick this up after that.